and one of the appliances in the home was a GE range. And we discovered shortly after starting to use it that several of the control knobs were broken. And you can see this is an attempt to repair the knob with Gorilla Glue, but I can sort of make it work somewhat with the repairs, but they tend to break again over time. These knobs are made with a very lightweight plastic. They have a stainless steel paint finish on them, but they're very light material. And when I try to turn the knob that the stem attaches to on the range, just turning it by hand, I'm unable to do so, because at the off position, there's a certain amount of pressure that's required or torque that's required before it'll start to turn. So it requires quite a bit of torque to twist. And with this very lightweight plastic, these knobs would seem to me as almost guaranteed to break after a short amount of use. Whether they last a year or 2 years, I don't know, but certainly with a moderate amount of turning the stove on and off repeatedly, these parts are guaranteed to break. Now, in contrast, at my former home, I had a Samsung range that was a more expensive appliance, a less expensive appliance by about 3/4 of the cost. And similar kind of product in terms of its position at the sort of entry level in the line of flat range cookers. And in contrast, the controls on the Samsung product were made out of a solid metal with a rubber gasket. And we've had that oven for 7 years. And in that time, it has shown no wear whatsoever in terms of the controls. The controls are still in excellent condition and work reliably, turn on the different elements without issue. So I saw this as a question of GE choosing to use a very low-cost plastic component for an item that is going to be seeing a lot of exercise of use over the course of the product lifetime, and certainly within a reasonably short period of use, potentially not able to sustain that activity without breaking. Since it had been over a year from the time that the stove had been purchased by the previous owners of the house, by the time I reported this to GE, the parts were no longer under the 1-year warranty. So GE informed me that yes, we could replace the parts at the cost of about $12.50 or $14. It depends on whether you buy them from GE or you buy them from a third-party site. So they're not terribly expensive parts to replace, but the very fact that a consumer who has, and I have, these are just 2 of them, but I have 3 out of the 5 controls that have broken on me, having to spend, after you pay for taxes and shipping, upwards of about $60 to replace these 3 plastic parts, seemed to me an affront to the way a big company should treat its consumers. And my impression was that this was perhaps a deliberate strategy on GE's part to manufacture with such low quality components as to essentially ensure a potential product post-sale revenue stream after the sale of the initial product. So I complained to GE about this. I sent their Canadian division, I think they're handled by Mabe Canada, I contacted them initially by telephone and was asked to send photographs as follow-up, and was told that a customer service manager would get back to me fairly shortly. And I waited, let's just see now, I contacted them on April the 28th. And by the middle of May, I had still not received any word, so some 2.5 weeks later. So I called them again and complained that it didn't seem that they were particularly interested in speaking with me after I'd gone through the trouble of photographing to document the problem and conveyed this to their attention with all the details of the product. And a few days later, I finally received a call back from a Diane Davis, who left me her number, and when I returned her call, I didn't ask her to replace the items gratis. I was more curious as to what GE's sort of decision-making process was with regard to these parts. And I asked specifically as to what the price point was in their line of electric ranges that GE made the transition between these flimsy, lightweight, cheap plastic control knobs to something more solid, perhaps made out of metal, like the Samsung equivalent. And I had to ask the question about 5 times. Ms. Davis repeatedly refused to give me a straight answer. She kept saying, well, there's no price cutoff, and there are all sorts of different products we have in this line of ranges. There are different finishes and different textures. And I thanked her repeatedly for that information, and I kept asking if she would tell me, what is let's say the lowest cost range that GE sells, where they decide to use more solid components, so solid metal controls. And she consistently refused to answer the question. So I asked her if she would mind if I publicized this, and she was somewhat reluctant, but she did not refuse. So I began to take to social media and comment on the comparison between the GE product and a comparison equivalent from Samsung. I'm certainly not a representative or any way connected to Samsung. I just happened to purchase one of their products, and by comparison, I was much more impressed with the quality and the effort to build something that wouldn't immediately break down on its customers. Most distressing to me, though, was the line taken by Ms. Davis that she's aware that these plastic knobs can break, but it's not considered a problem at GE. And when I started searching for this online, I found that there were in fact many other consumers who had experienced similar problems with their GE appliances and were upset at the fact that these knobs break. So GE is clearly aware of the problem, but doesn't seem to care. And as somebody who is concerned with consumer rights in general and consumer rights advocacy, I felt that it was important to publicize this and to hold GE accountable. As I believe I noted in my post on your forum, there are consumer protection laws in Canada, and there are equivalent laws in the United States. In the United States, there's the Uniform Commercial Code. Article 2 deals with sales. Part 3, the general obligation and construction of contract, specifically subsection 2-315, deals with implied warranty and fitness for a particular purpose. And under that legislation, despite the merchant or the manufacturer setting a particular warranty period of, let's say, 1 year, as GE does for returns or reports of defective products, the Uniform Commercial Code provides to the consumers greater protections. And I would certainly urge those in the United States to consider taking action against GE through small claims courts, for example, when there are product defects such as this and the company is not being responsive to repair them. In preparing for this discussion with you, I checked in Quebec, where I live in Canada. We have the Consumer Protection Act, and I didn't realize until just this afternoon that one of the items of the Consumer Protection Act, Chapter P40.1, Article 53, includes a mention that the rights of action against a manufacturer may be exercised by any consumer who is a subsequent purchaser of the goods. So even though I'm not the original purchaser of this range, I purchased the home that came with it, and therefore I purchased the range itself. I am a subsequent purchaser of the goods, and therefore I have recourse against GE, as I just discovered now, under the Consumer Protection Act, and I intend to avail myself of those rights, and I'm going to write a registered letter to GE Mabe Canada and demand that they take action. So I expect that this will be settled because GE is not going to want to go to small claims court, and really I'm obviously not doing this for the question of the cost. I mean, $50 or $60 is definitely not worth my time to pursue this, but it's a matter of how many thousands of other consumers are in a similar boat. And I think it's important and incumbent upon some consumers to stand up against companies who are trying to cheat consumers in this manner and basically convince others and encourage others to pursue their rights. So that's where I am, and
I hear you.
There's perhaps 2 aspects to your question. There's the one, what I expect GE to do versus what I would like GE to do. So what I expect them to do is to say, fine, we're going to replace the parts with identical cheap plastic knobs. which may again break down in another year, and you can complain again at that point. That's what I expect they will do. What I would like them to do is to admit the fact that their quality control on these parts is not something that is appropriate, or I should say not the quality control, but their choice of materials is not appropriate for the cost of the appliance. Something that costs $1,200 plus tax Canadian really should not be coming with flimsy plastic knobs that probably cost, I'm guessing, about 50 to 75 cents each in terms of materials, and maybe even less. Sure, produced in volume, I mean, it's peanuts. Samsung, I'm sure, spent several dollars per part, and yes, that drives up the cost. But then, the consumer has something that feels like it's made to last, and I think that's an impression that a company of GE's nature should be striving to provide to its customers. So what I would like them to do is to recognize the fact that these are substandard parts, and to replace them with metal equivalents, with something that is more similar to the quality of the Samsung construction, and perhaps as a goodwill gesture to offer replacements gratis to all customers who have purchased similar items that have the similar cheap plastic knobs that are guaranteed to break.